Hey guys, I know it's been a while since I posted a video, but welcome back. What I wanted to do in today's video is talk about a question that I once received during an interview. And the question went, what is the difference between the comparator interface and the comparable interface? Now, before I even get to the differences between these two interfaces, I wanted to talk about how these interfaces are similar to each other. First of all, both of these interfaces are used for sorting objects. These interfaces also allow you to create your own custom sorting logics for objects that you create or objects that already exist in Java. All right, so let's get right into the differences between these two interfaces. The first thing I want to talk about is the comparator interface. The comparator interface is basically an interface that enables you to provide custom comparison logic for data types that you have no control over. Now, the data types that you have no control over are the objects that already exist in Java. So they're basically objects that you do not create yourself. And they're basically, as I said before, objects that initially come with Java, such as integers, long, string, etc. Another thing about the comparator interface is that it's a part of the java.utils package. Another thing is that when you're implementing the comparator interface in a class, you have to implement the method compare. And this compare method is going to hold your customized sorting logic. And as you can see in this compare method, it takes in two parameters, object 1 and object 2, which are basically going to be compared against each other to come up with your own sorting logic, pretty much. I'll talk about that more in the next slide. Another thing I wanted to talk about is the collections.sort. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this method, but the collections.sort method in itself is basically a method that is used to sort elements within an array list. So just imagine none of these parameters were here for right now. If you were to call the collections.sort and you were to pass in, and let's just say an array list of strings, then each one, basically the list would be sorted in alphabetical order. Whereas if you were to have an array list of integers and call the collections.sort, these integers would be sorted in ascending order. But when we're working with comparator, what we're doing is, as I said before, working with our own customized sorting logic. So let's just say we have an array list of strings. Let's just say we have this list here. It's going to be an array list of strings. And we call this comparator. We call this comparator. What we're doing here is applying the logic that we've written in this compare method and applying it to the list that we're passing in. And this is going to make a whole lot more sense later. If you don't understand it now, don't worry about it for right now, because it's going to make a whole lot more sense afterwards. But that is pretty much all you need to really know about the comparator interface. Okay. So this is also related to the comparator interface. I actually wanted to talk about a little bit about the compare method. Now, when we're working with the comparator interface, the first thing that we need to do is to create a class, as you can see here. So we have this class here, and what we're doing is giving the name of the class, and I name this class sort by length. Okay, and what I'm doing here is implementing the comparator interface. And after I do that, I want to pass in an object type. And for example, we're going to pass in an object type of string. So based on this line alone, what I'm going to be doing is comparing a list of strings, but I want to sort the strings based on length, pretty much. So right here, yeah, I just have a rough example. I'm not going to go into too much detail with the compare method right now about how to actually sort by length. I'll talk about that later on in the video, but just wanted to just show you the basic generic setup. All right, so as I said before, whenever you're implementing the comparator interface, you have to implement a method called compare. Okay, and this method, as you can see, is going to return an int, and this int is basically used to sort the elements in the list that you're passing, or that you're going to be applying this comparator logic to, pretty much. So I just wanted to just show you the general setup. As you can see, this compare method is going to take in two objects, and since we're working with string, I'm just going to use the string O1 and then string O2, and then somewhere in this method we have to come up with our sorting logic so that we're able to enforce the sorting by length of the strings that we have. So that's pretty much what the compare method is really all about. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is the comparable interface. Now, this interface allows you to specify how objects that you are implementing get compared. So as opposed to the comparator interface, what I'm talking about now is a comparable interface. So these are objects that we are going to be creating ourselves. So with this interface, we're able to come up with our own sorting logic for objects that we ourselves have control over. So objects such as, for example, student, bicycle, person, etc. Another thing about the comparable interface that differs from the comparator interface is that it is a part of the java.lang package. Another thing is that it consists of a method called compare_to. And as you can see, this method, it only takes in one parameter, this object one parameter. And basically how this method is going to work is this parameter that we have here is going to be compared against the object that is going to be compared against one of the attributes of the object that you are creating yourself. You know, this may sound a little bit confusing right now, but once I get to the coding part, I think it's going to make a whole lot more sense for you guys, just in case you don't understand it now. But yeah, okay. So another thing I wanted to talk about is a collections.sort. Now, this collections.sort method is basically going to be used to sort the list. And basically, since we're going to be implementing the comparable interface inside of that the Pojo, what's going to happen is that the list that we have here is going to sort automatically. So to make this a little bit more clear, let me show you what the compare_to method does. All right, so as you can see here, let's just say we create ourselves our own object. So if we're creating our own object, the first thing we want to do is create a class. Let's just call it student. And this student class is going to implement this comparable interface. And then we also want to specify the type of objects that we're going to be comparing. We're going to be comparing student objects. Now, somewhere in the code, after we implement the comparable interface, we want to implement the method compare_to. Now, in this compare_to method, we want to compare attributes of the objects so that we can sort these objects accordingly. As you can see here, we have this.name.compare_to o.name. So basically what's going to happen is that if we have an array list of students with different attributes, the student objects are going to be sorted based on this attribute here, the name. And hopefully this makes sense to you guys. Okay, now what I wanted to do here is talk about the return values of the methods in their associated interface. First of all, let's talk about the comparator method. Now, as I said before, the comparator method has a method that needs to be implemented called compare. And this compare method is going to take in two parameters. And these two parameters are going to be objects that are going to be compared against each other. Now, when it comes to the return values, this compare method is going to return an int value. And that int value is going to consist of a number that is going to determine where in the list an object should be placed in order to satisfy the logic that we implement in this method. If this method returns 1, that means that O1 is greater than O2. If the method returns 0, then that means that O1 is equal to O2. If the method returns -1, that means that O1 is lesser than O2. Pretty straightforward. Now I'm going to talk about comparable interface. Also, as I said before, whenever you're implementing the comparable interface, you also have to implement the method compare to, which takes in one parameter, one object. Now, this method also has a return type of int and is going to return one of three values. If 1 is returned, then that means that the object's attribute is greater than O1 attribute. If 0 is returned, then object's attribute is equal to O1 attribute. And then, of course, if -1 is returned, then that basically means that the object's attribute is lesser than O1 attribute. So to make everything that I've talked about a little bit more clear, let's jump right into the code. Alright guys, so what you see here is our project. As you can see, I've already created myself this application object, app.java. And what I wanted to do first is talk a little about the comparator interface and show you how to actually use it. So we're going to start writing some code here now. So before I do that, let me just zoom in really quick for you guys. All right. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is create ourselves an array list. So let's just go array list string al equals new array list. All right, so we have an empty array list here, and what we want to do is just add a list of strings first of all. So let's just go al.add zebra. That's an array list of animals. al.add dog, al.add cat, al.add monkey. Alright, this is pretty straightforward. So as you can see here, we have ourselves an array list, and we've added some elements to this array list. 4 elements: zebra, dog, cat, and monkey. And then what we want to do here is just simply print it out. And then we just want to run the application. It'll be pretty obviously what we're going to be getting back. We just go to the console. We get zebra, dog, cat, and monkey. Okay. All right, so if you remember from my presentation, I talked about the collections.sort method, which is basically used to sort a collection of elements in alphabetical or ascending numerical order, pretty much depending on the content that will be added, that is added to an array or a list. So just want to go collections.sort al. Now what's happening here, as I said before, is pretty much just going to sort all of the elements within the array zebra, dog, cat, and monkey in alphabetical order. So there's going to be a natural sort that is going to take place at this line here, at line number 15. So just want to run this, see what we get. And as you can see here, each one of the elements that we've entered into this array are in alphabetical order: cat, dog, monkey, and zebra, as you can see right here. Okay, so as I said before, this collections.sort is used for a natural type of sorting order, but let's just say we wanted to Yeah, we wanted to sort these elements in a custom type of sorting order. So let's say we wanted to sort these elements in a reverse sorting order. How would we go about doing that? Well, we'd pretty much just use the comparator interface. So what we want to do is actually create a new class. So we can simply just create a class here. Class. We can name this class reverse sort. And then we're going to implement the comparator interface. And what we want to do here is pretty much just pass in the data type of the array list, pretty much. So the elements that are going to be stored in this array list here are going to be of type string. So we want to pass that in here. You just want to import this comparator. And as you can see here, we have this reverse sort, and if we hover over it, it's going to say add unimplemented methods. And the method that we want to add is this compare method, which is something that I talked about before. And as you can see, this compare method is going to take in two string objects, and these string objects are going to be compared against each other so that we can get the type of sorting logic that we want. We have, as I said before, the two interfaces, comparator and comparable, allow you to write your own type of sorting logic that you want to perform on objects. All right, so we want to reverse the sort. In order to do that, it's fairly simple. You would just go O1 dot compare to O2. And then we just want to put a minus sign in front of here. Now the reason we're putting this minus sign here is because we want the content of this array list to be sorted in reverse alphabetical order. If I were to remove this minus sign, it will sort in alphabetical order, but if I add it, the elements are going to be sorted in reverse alphabetical order. So this is fairly simple to understand. If you have any questions, about this, leave them in the comments below, and I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. But when we're working with this reverse sort, we actually want to apply this method to the sort down here. So as you can see here, we were earlier talking about how collections.sort, and then we pass in the array list, would sort each one of these elements in natural sorting order, in a alphabetical sorting order. But let's just say we wanted to add our own custom logic, which we have right here. The way that we'll do that is by simply going to collections.sort, and after this array list, we put a comma, and then we would just go new reverse sort. And that's pretty much it. So to just see what happens, we want to go up here. We just want to run this application, and then we're going to see what we get. Go down here to the console, and we have zebra, monkey, dog, and cat. And as you can see, each one of the elements are in reversed sorting order. So this is an example of how you would go about using the comparator interface. I can show you a little bit of something else, when it comes to sorting these elements using the comparator. So let's get into that right now. So let's just say we have this array list right here, and these array lists and the contents within this array list have strings that are of a different type of length. So let's just put some random strings in here. Let's just say, okay, we got dog. Well, we're just gonna put some random strings in here, okay? let's do something like this. All right. So let's say we do something like this, okay? Now, as you can see, each one of these strings have a different length. Now, what we want to do is sort each one of these strings by length. So earlier we were sorting these strings in in reverse alphabetical order, but now we want to sort each one of these strings by the length of the string. Now, the reason I want to do this is because I did get an interview question on this before where I had to come up with code in order to sort an array list of strings by length. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. So what we want to do first is actually go up to this class. Originally it was called reverse sort, but we want to change the name now to sort by length to make this a whole lot clearer. Now what we want to do is actually change this logic here. So we want to sort these elements within this array list based on the length. So from the smallest length all the way up to the highest length, we want to sort the elements within this array. So this is how we'll go about doing that. First of all, we can remove this. And what we need to do is actually have some different types of conditional statements. So if O1 dot length is greater than O2 dot length, then we're going to return 1. Okay? So basically what this is saying is that if the length of one object is greater than the length of another object, then we actually want to put this length here. We actually want to return 1, pretty much. And as I said before, whenever you're working with this compare method, there is pretty much going to be a return type of 0, 1, and -1. 1 means object 1 is greater than object 2. 0, object 1 is equal to object 2. And then O is lesser than, O1 is lesser than object 2. Basically, you would just return -1. So I'm going to write each one of these scenarios out right now. Else if O1 dot length is lesser than O2 dot length, then I just want to return -1, and then else return 0. Just want to put these semicolons here, make sure everything will compile properly. And this is pretty much it. Now, as you can see, with these conditionals that I have here, I'm returning a specific number. And basically what's going to happen is that whenever I call this sort by length class, the two objects or objects within this list that we have down here are going to be compared, and then there's going to be return value, which is actually going to determine where each one of these elements need to be placed in the list. So that's pretty much it. So as you can see here, we've changed the class name to sort by length, and we want to go down here now and actually change this to sort by length. All right, and then we're going to run this and basically just see what we get. So you want to run that, and as you can see, each one of the elements in this array list are sorted by length. As I said before, we were sorting them simply in reverse alphabetical order, but now we're sorting these elements by length. So we have Z, dog, attic, and then monkey nation. And that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about right now, in relation to using the comparator interface. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. All right, guys, so as you can see here, I've created myself a new application object, app2.java. And what I wanted to do in this part of the video is talk about the comparable interface. Now, as I said before in my presentation, the comparable interface is an interface that's basically used to sort objects that you create yourself. So they're basically is basically used to sort objects that you do have control over. So we're just going to jump right into it. So the first thing you need to do to follow this example is to pretty much just create an array list, and the type of elements that are going to be held within this array list are going to be of type student. Okay, and we want to name this student array equals new array list. And as you can see here, when we hover over this student, it's basically going to say we haven't created the class yet. So we're going to just go ahead and create this student class right now. And we just want to go to finish. As you can see, we have our student class now. And this issue pretty much has been resolved. Okay, now in this student class, what we want to do first is so basically what we want to do first is pretty much just create a plain old Java object. So we're going to give this student some attributes. First of all, public string name. Students, they have a name. Public string major. And then public int age. Okay. All right, now what we want to do next is to actually create some getters and setters for each one of these attributes that we've created. So in order to quickly do that, we would just right click, source, let's see, and then implement getters and setters, as you can see right here. We then want to select all, then go to OK. And as you can see, each one of the getter and setter methods for student have been created automatically. Now, another thing that we want to do to make this a little bit easier for us would be to create ourselves a constructor. So we would go public student, then here we would just pass in parameters that need to be matched up with the attributes of this student. So we would just go string name, string major, and int age. And then we just want to initialize this dot name equals name, this dot major equals major, this dot age equals age. All right. So we basically have just constructed ourselves a Pojo object, or a plain old Java object, which basically consists of some attributes. We have our constructor, as you can see here. We also have our getter and setter methods, so that we'll be able to set the values of the student. But this constructor is pretty much going to make this a whole lot easier for us, as I'll show you down the line. Okay, so what we want to do now is use the comparable interface. Now, in order to use the comparable interface, what we need to do is simply just go implements comparable. And we would have to implement this within this class right here. And we also want to pass in the data, the type of objects that we're going to be comparing. We just want to go student. All right, so up here, I just want to go over this one more time. We have a class student, and it's going to implement the comparable interface. And as I said before, when you're using comparable, you're using this interface to help you create logic for sorting elements that you do have control over. So for this student object, since we've created it, we do have control over it. And as you can see here, when we hover over student, we're getting this error. So let's see what's going on. It's telling us to add the unimplemented method. So we add that unimplemented method. Then if we scroll down, you'll see that it automatically creates, well, it auto generates this method here, compare to. And basically this is going to be the method that we're going to be using to help create our sorting logic. All right, so as you can see, the compare to method, as I said before, takes in one parameter, would be student O that we have here. And what we want to do is compare the attributes of this student with another student that is going to be passed in or compared against. So let's just say we had an array list of students and we wanted to sort, well, an array list of student objects, and we wanted to sort these student objects based on a specific attribute of the student. So let's just say we wanted to sort the students based on the student name. So this is how you'll go about doing that. You'll simply just go this dot name dot compare to, and then o dot name. And this is pretty much it as far as the logic goes. So what's going to happen here is that each one of the student objects that we have in the array list that we've created earlier are pretty much going to be sorted based on the student name. And I'm going to show you how to do that right now just to make everything clear. But this is pretty much all you need to create for this student class. You just would have your attributes, constructor, getter and setter methods. And since we're implementing the comparable interface, we pretty much have to implement this method compare to, and then we can come up with our own sorting logic, which is right here. So we're going to go back to our app2.java class. And what we want to do after that is to actually start creating our student objects. So we could do this the shorthanded way or the long way. So okay, let's do this the shorthanded way. So we would go student array dot add new student, and then in here we would just add each one of our attributes for student. So we would go Jake, which is the name. We'll then give this student a major, let's just say computer science, and then we'll give this student an age, which would be 18. Okay, I want to just create a couple more of these student objects, or add a couple of more of these student objects to the student array. Then we just change the attributes. So we'll change the name again, Cynthia, a made up name, maybe a real name, who knows. English, and her age is 25. Then we want to do the same thing for this last element here. Cynthia, and let's just say she's actually majoring in psychology, and then her age is 22. Alright, so we have each of our student objects that have been added to this student array, and what we want to do now is to basically sort these objects pretty much. So once again, we'll use the collection.sort, and then student array. And you would think that we can just call the system.out.println, but when you do that, you're going to realize that the objects are not going to be printed out as they should, because this is an array list of objects. So we would actually have to go through each one of the students and actually pull out the attributes to display these students properly. But to just show you, let's just go this out student array, and we run it. You're gonna see what I'm talking about. So as you can see, these are student objects, but it's not being, these student objects are not being displayed properly, you know, and that can be fixed with a toString if we wanted to do that. But for right now, let's just create ourselves a loop for right now. I'll show you how to display each one of the contents, because what's happening is that it's sorting this array list of students. And another thing about this sort is that you'll realize, as in contrast to the comparator interface, we're not adding two parameters here, because in the comparator interface, we were passing in an array list, and we were also passing in the actual class. But since the student class actually implements the comparable interface, we don't need to explicitly call it, since it's already being called here, you know, in this student class. All right, so let's start off with a for loop. For int I equals 0, I is lesser than student array dot size I plus plus, and then from here we'll just go sys out student array dot get at position I dot name plus, separate each one of these attributes by a comma, plus student array dot get at position I dot major plus, you know, we could put each one of these on separate lines to make this a whole lot easier for us. Let's do something like this. Plus student array dot get at position I dot age. And this is pretty much it. Let me walk you through what's going on here. So as you can see here, we have our student array, and we're looping through our student array. And what we're doing is actually printing out an object upon each iteration, or yeah, for each element within this student array. So for the first iteration, we're going to print out the student array .get at position I.name. So the current student, we're going to print out the name of the current student, separated by comma. We're also going to print out the current student's major as well as the current student's age. And this is going to be done 3 times. So when we run this application, we should see each one of the students' objects in the console, and these student objects are going to be sorted based on the custom sorting logic in the student.java class that I've created, which is right here. So this basically means all of the student objects are going to be sorted based on name. So if we run this application, go down to the console, let's see what we get. So we got Cynthia, Jake, and then Zenithia. So as you can see, each one of these student objects are sorted based on the name. And that's pretty much how you would go about using the comparable interface. I basically just wanted to create this video so that you guys understand how to use both of these interfaces. Basically, as I said before, these two interfaces are used for sorting. They just sort in slightly different ways, so you have the ability to implement the sorting logic for these two interfaces in slightly different ways, and just want to show you the key difference between the two. Okay, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video if you've learned something from here. Also, don't forget to subscribe, and see you in the next one.